All right, y'all, good afternoon. My name is Stacy and I handle adult education here at the North Carolina Museum of History. And we're so glad that you're joining us for today's program, History at High Noon, learning about history from our historic places. We ask that you please type any questions that you have for our guest speaker into the chat function located at the bottom center of your screen. At the end of the talk, I will ask our speaker as many of your questions as time allows. So it's my honor to introduce and welcome our speaker today, Myrick Howard. From 1978 to 2003, Myrick Howard served as president of Preservation North Carolina, the state's only statewide private nonprofit preservation organization. During his tenure, Preservation North Carolina became one of the nation's largest and most prestigious statewide preservation organizations. The National Park Service referred to Preservation North Carolina as the premier statewide preservation organization in the South, if not the nation. A Durham native, Myrick attended Brown University and the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where he received his master's degree in city planning and a law degree in 1978. In 2006, he participated in the executive program for nonprofit leaders at Stanford University's Graduate School of Business. In the fall of 2024, he entered Duke University's Graduate Liberal Studies program. Since 1988, he has taught a graduate seminar on historic preservation planning each year at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. His book, Buying Time for Heritage, now in a new edition from UNC Press, is used extensively around the country in preservation education programs. Through the years, Myrick has received a number of national, statewide, and local awards, including the 2023 Louise DuPont Crown and Shield Award from the National Trust for Historic Preservation, the nation's highest preservation award. He was also named the 2023 Tar Heel of the Year by the Raleigh News and Observer. In 1996, he was inducted into the Order of the Longleaf Pine by Governor James B. Hunt, Jr. Myrick lives in a 1939 historic duplex, his eighth renovation. So Myrick, I'm going to turn things over to you. Welcome. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Stacy. Appreciate it and appreciate the invitation. And look forward to getting questions from those in the audience, as Stacy said, through the chat. And Stacy, feel free to interrupt if there's a question that's like a right now kind of question. You know, it's been interesting to work in preservation for 45 years. Actually, it's really more than 50 years now, counting time in school and time since retirement. And what's been really fascinating to me has been the things we learn from these buildings. And they're things we learn. If the buildings were gone, we wouldn't know about these things because there's no particular reason to go do research on a building or a family or location or neighborhood if it's gone. It's just at that point, you know, it's pretty static and not that interesting. The let's see. Okay, I'm getting myself the technology right here. You know, just did a book with UNC Press a year ago on buying time with heritage, and it's a how-to book. It's really primarily intended for students, but the real gist of the book is that that preservation really is about real estate at the end of the day. It's not what I'm going to be talking about today, but give you a little taste of what my work has been about. Has been saving endangered properties, and it's really fundamentally about real estate. And when I say that, it's about who owns it, how's it zoned, what's the land value, what's the building value, what's the type of renovations that are needed. Will they, can you recoup your investment? Can you do some of the work yourself? It's really very much a real estate issue when you get down to it. And I used to tell folks, you know, the analogy for preservation in North Carolina was we're the animal shelter for historic properties. We're the ones who are trying to find somebody to take this poor dog or this poor kitty cat and take care of them, love them. We don't want to keep them. We want to put it in somebody else's hands so we can move on to the next kitty cat, the next puppy that needs some love and attention. So that animal shelter analogy has worked really well through the years in explaining what we do. So, our work has been with all sorts of buildings, school buildings, industrial buildings, houses, some very old, some very new. Mill villages, been something very particularly interested in. We've worked with all kinds of buildings, but today I'm going to really focus on three buildings that we've worked with. Um, and the things that we have learned about those buildings um through the years. Um, and again, if the buildings weren't there and other tangible pieces of evidence of these people, we would not be particularly interested in them. Um, First one I want to talk a little bit about is Union Tavern in Milton. Milton's up near Danville, really, really close to the Virginia border. In fact, there's one stoplight in Milton, and if you were to go about 500 yards north, you'd be in Virginia. And it was the home of Thomas Day. Uh, we knew some about Thomas Day back, 25, 30 years ago, but nothing compared to what we know now. And that's again because the building has survived. And I was telling Stacy, one of the interesting little twists was a conversation I had um, about the image of Thomas Day. We don't have any images of Thomas Day um, to actually work from, no photographs, etc. So, to my knowledge, and I don't think to anyone. If somebody's got images of Thomas Day, please let us know. But Thomas Day, they this is the statue of him in front of the North Carolina Museum of History. And when the first version of this, or the first draft of this, was being done, it was Thomas Day in work clothes as the craftsman, as the tradesman. Well, Thomas Day actually had 50 plus people working for him. He's that would be like putting one of the Broyhills, up at with with woodworking materials. This is a guy who owned the shop. This is the guy who was meeting with the clients. This is the guy who is doing the work, working with the legislature, working with the university. And so they upgraded his clothing quite a bit in doing this statue. But let's go to Thomas Day and Union Tavern. Union Tavern just got opened as a state historic site, literally within the last year. Very excited about that because Thomas Day's story is a very complicated story. And the more people hear complicated stories, the better it is for our understanding history and understanding where we are today. We live in a complicated time. We're not the first people to live in complicated times. Thomas Day certainly lived in complicated times, especially as a free black man. So the building is being visited and so forth. Here's a 1940 photograph of it by Thomas Waterman. Um, the building was built as a tavern. It was bought by Thomas Day, and a shop was added to it at the back for his woodworkers to work. Here's Union Tavern in 1989. The moral of this story is do not burn your leaves on a windy day. The owner of the building was burning leaves in the backyard, and gust of wind came along and blew the leaves up under the structure. Very, very sad. What do? This is where Preservation North Carolina played the animal shelter in the extreme. This is a poor dog that's running down the middle of the interstate, and we're trying to save him and get him a home. So we acquired the property. We actually paid money for this building, and then worked with local folks who did a incredible job for many years to get this thing put back together, and now it's very proud to say it's a state historic site. Little side story here is the first time I saw this building, I would have taken the photograph this day this photograph on the day I'm talking about, I was mic'd by a local TV station, Greensburg TV station, and they put a mic on me to, and I was walking around the building, and this is what the back of the building looked like, and I was saying things I probably shouldn't say with a microphone on. It was very disturbing to see this. Very, it's kind of like, can we keep this? Here's the building from the back after we've done the first round of stabilization. And they put utility poles into the ground up adjacent to the building and attached the brick walls to the utility poles and then tethered workers in because it was unsafe to let workers into the building. And you can see those end parapets on each, or the end gables on each side of the building, which are just kind of hanging in there. And you can see how it's attached over on the right-hand side to a utility pole. Now, someday somebody's going to have a little fun with, kids saying, go find the evidence of the utility poles because they're still there. In the sense that, after the building was stabilized, we took the utility poles out by cutting them down rather than disrupting the soil. So that it's kind of like stumps, so to speak, all around the building, from those poles that were used to stabilize it. This is 2020, so 5 years ago. Great and important federal structure, and now a museum. Interestingly, the mantles that were inside the building survived the fire because what happened was the roof collapsed into the center of the building, and so those end walls were still standing where the mantles were, and they're fascinating to look at. I particularly love this mantle. Very whimsical, the vine growing up on each side of the firebox, and then across the top are grapes. It was a tavern after all, and there they are, a little up closer. This is more like what you're going to see when you think about Thomas Day. The museum there has, the museum, as in North Carolina Museum of History in Raleigh, has a great collection of Thomas Day woodwork. He's noted for these curving lines and sinuous lines of furniture and mantles, etc. You can see the shelf on the front of the mantle is curving. That was a Thomas Day trademark, probably from the 1840s into through the 1850s. He had some very prominent customers, for example, Bartlett Yancey, for whom Yanceyville and Yancey County are named. He was the youngest Speaker of the North Carolina House. House that we sold vampires for, and still having to work with the covenants that we put on the property to make sure that the property is protected. And there's one of the Thomas Day Newells, and in that house, very interesting lines, very flowing lines. So one of the first times we got introduced to Thomas Day was with Clarendon Hall in Yanceyville. This photograph from 1978. We acquired this property. Again, this is a a Great Dane that needs help. Big, fabulous house, but it had early Thomas Day woodwork in it, restored by our buyers, and who did a great job. It's now in its third generation of ownership since we acquired it. Ben and Margaret Williams, some of you may know, were the ones who really did the restoration. Here's one of the mantles in this house. It's basically a pattern book mantle at this point. Thomas Day would be in his 20s, early 20s, and he's doing mantles, etc. They're straight out of the books that he would have had and on the subject. Here's another one. Take a look at this one, and you'll see it again as it gets changed through the years. This is, again, the straight out of the book version. He's doing very academic version of the mantle straight out of the book, the popular style, plus or minus 1830, 1835. He's also doing the brackets on the stair straight out of the book. And now I'm going to show you some of the buildings at Preservation North Carolina. Some of the poor dogs that Preservation North Carolina worked with through the years that have Thomas Day connections. Here's one, and it's been beautifully restored by Jerry Nix, who's done a lot of great work through the years in the Guilford County and up into Caswell County area. Now here's one of the mantles that's a very the same big picture as one of the ones you just saw, but the Greek ornamentation's almost done in reverse, and you have the broad shelf with it. Now here's one that's a variation of the mantle. I said, keep this in your mind, but it's stretched a little bit, and now it has some detailing across the front. Another house we worked with, poor dog, Sally Martin house. It's never a good sign when you have a no trespassing sign on the front porch with a mattress. We acquired it, sold it. Great buyer from Greensboro, who did a beautiful renovation of the house. But lo and behold, inside this house, which predates Thomas Day, inside the house you find Thomas Day woodwork, a couple of mantles that they came back and replaced. Here's another variation on that theme of the mantle I showed you. Now you've seen, this is the third variation, well, second variation on the original theme. Very wide version of the stepped in shelves or side pieces, but very big mantle too. So why am I showing you Franklin County? What's going on there? This is Jones Cookhouse house that we very poor dog, pitiful dog, that we acquired and resold. This is from the 1980s, and it was first buyers took it from a F to a C, the next buyers took it from a C to a B, and then the most recent buyers have taken it from a B to an A. And it's a real pleasure to see that through the years. So that's what it looks like now. And you go into this house. The early part is the back part, and the front part's from the 1840s, plus or minus. Don't hold me to these dates. And they've done a great job, interesting job with the using two different colors for the two different periods of ownership. Well, you go in on this side. This is a very typical Franklin Warren County mantle. Probably could name who the contractor was. Very, very typical for that area. Then you walk across the hall, and what's this curvilinear thing that's going on? Oversized, bulky. There it is in place. And you look at that and you kind of go, somehow that's got to be connected to Thomas Day, whether Day himself or Day's shop or someone who had been trained by Day and is working in Franklin County. But it's very different from the one across the hallway. That's a very, very typical Franklin County mantle. And across the way, you have what is a combination of Franklin County right around the firebox, but the mantle itself is surely got some combination or connection to Thomas Day. Now, what's going on there? Jones Cook was in the North Carolina General Assembly, and Thomas Day was doing some work for the North Carolina General Assembly when they're building the Capitol. And then at a later point, he's doing some work with the University of North Carolina as they're building, renovating and expanding Old East and Old West. So there's a pretty good chance that Jones Cook and Thomas Day met each other somewhere or another in that state work, and it's pretty good chance that Jones Cook said, I'm building a house, I want a mantle. So that's what you may have there. We're constantly learning. We don't have that documented, but we might someday. Just giving you a taste treat of some of the Thomas Day work. Um, Woodside, important plantation house that Thomas Day did the interior woodwork and probably did the windows and other forms of millwork for the house. This is the house with these very interesting images on the mantle. And I'm going to stop here and switch over to talk a little bit about Thomas Day. Um, Thomas Day, we didn't when we bought the Union Tavern in Milton, everybody talked about Thomas Day mainly in the context of his furniture, but also with some of his known woodwork. But didn't even know when he died, where did he come from? That state historic marker in front of the Union Tavern about Thomas Day, we didn't know a whole lot more than what's on that that was on that sign. And so back about, well, really 30 some years, almost 40 years ago, um, we were working with this, and someone in Virginia, in Richmond, anonymously sent us a package of materials that included an obituary for Thomas Day's brother. Um, the obituary was from Liberia, was from Monrovia, Liberia. Thomas Day's brother had gone to Liberia, as was very common. There was an effort to send African Americans back to Africa. Now, minor detail is by the time some of these folks are going back to Africa, they don't know the languages that their parents, grandparents, great grandparents might have known before being kidnapped and brought over uh, and making their way to North Carolina. But his brother was the Chief Justice of the Liberian Supreme Court. So in this obituary, it told who the parents were. We never knew who the parents were. Talked about his going to Warrenton, and his father had an issue with alcohol and was a craftsman who did work in Warrenton and finally kind of lost his business because of issues related to drinking. We had no idea that. We find out why and when he moved to Milton. And then it was fairly shortly after that that the brother John went to Liberia. But we suddenly had open up for us the story of Thomas Day, and you could take that story and build on it because we now know that he's in Milton doing this work. It's so complicated to talk about race in America. It's complicated in 2025. It was sure as heck complicated in the first half of the 19th century. So Thomas Day's a free black. What does that mean? That basically means that his mother is free. The designation of being enslaved versus being free goes by the mother. If it's a if the mother is enslaved, then the child is born enslaved. If the mother is free, then the child is born free. And often that has to do with the lineage there of how many white people are in the lineage of some of the enslaved and free black people that we learn about. And in Thomas Day's case, he probably would have been quite light skinned. We don't have any images of him. But he goes to marry a free black woman. He wants to marry a free black woman for Virginia. Well, you cannot bring a free black to North Carolina under the laws that were passed in the 1830s. If a free black left North Carolina, they could not come back. if they came back, they were subject to being enslaved, even though they are free. So the legislature passed a bill to allow Thomas Day to marry a free black woman from Virginia and bring her to North Carolina. That's how complicated this whole thing is regarding race. Then you have Thomas Day going north to abolitionist conventions. We know that he was doing it. We know registration. In some cases, we know where he was staying. Obviously, it was something he had to keep totally quiet about and make sure that none of his children said anything about it. And never, no one else would say anything about it, because if the white planters who were buying his mantles and newels and so forth had known that he's going to abolitionist conventions, they would have cut him short. Let's say, shall we say? But there he is sending his children to a school in Connecticut that was very well known for its abolitionist work. It's a great complicating thing to wrap your head around. It gets even more complicated to wrap your head around when you understand that Thomas Day was a slave owner. And we think immediately, quickly move to, that's a bad thing. He must have been a horrible person. But in this case, he's, from all appearances, and we don't know this in a literal sense, but from all appearances, what he is doing is he is purchasing younger males and apprenticing them and then freeing them after they are apprenticed. So in a way, he is using the tools of the day to protect young black men and give them jobs, very high paying jobs, and he had, working for him, he had white employees, he had hired out enslaved employees, as in he is, so to speak, renting enslaved folks from other people, usually on a 1 year basis. He is hiring free blacks, and he has his own enslaved workforce. So very complicated, just right there. I'm going to be looking forward to seeing how our state of North Carolina, through the state of Surfside, interprets all of this, because we need to lay it out so people understand how totally complicated this is. And if the building weren't there, wouldn't be having the conversation. So I'm going to move from my tirade over to a little bit of chocolate. This is in Woodside, the newel there. Here are some of the very interesting newels that come out of the shop of Thomas Day. Bear in mind, when you talk about this as a Thomas Day newel, he may not have had his hands on it. One of his workers did, and their imagination's going wild. This is very much like the Empire furniture that he's also making. Here's a much bolder version of that mantle. And then I love this one. It looks like it's 1950s Swedish modern, and yet it's 1850s. And we think that those are the initials TD, as presented as a newel. Beautiful though they are, and maybe with the TD aspect. For the last 30, 40 years, there's been an effort to do education about African American history and culture in the schools, using Thomas Day as a person to talk about. Thomas Day had the largest furniture making shop in North Carolina. He was the first furniture maker in North Carolina to use steam powered equipment. Fairly easy to talk about Thomas Day as the founder or the father of North Carolina furniture industry. Sadly, Thomas Day disappears literally in 1860, 1861. He just disappears. We don't know what happened to him, where he's buried, where he lived after that, because he lost his shop. 1858, there was a major recession, depression that took place. And because Thomas Day is a free black, he cannot take a white person to court. So if he has IOUs, or he has notes from white people all over the place where he's done work for them, just like any other furniture salesperson, any other mill worker would do. You're not paying for it all up front, you're paying it over time. Well, Thomas Day had no way of enforcing any of these notes. He was worth tens of thousands of dollars in 1858 and worth nothing by 1860, 1861. Very, very sad. And when you talk about he worth tens of thousands of dollars, that's in their day. He is literally a millionaire who lost his fortune because he could not take whites to court and testify against them. His daughter went on to marry Dr. Shepherd, who founded North Carolina Central University in Durham, and there's one of the dorms that's named for her. He has other descendants who are medical doctors, etc. A very prominent family. So, quick question, Stacy. Any questions I should answer at this particular moment?
Not quite yet, but I'm going to put a reminder in the chat for everybody.
Okay. Well, I'm going to switch gears to another property that's would have been 30 years ago pretty much associated entirely with the lost cause of the Confederacy, and that's the Bellamy Mansion in Wilmington. Why is it going to be looked at that way? Is because it's got big white columns around it. Now, I want you to look at this drawing that was done by the young supervising architect who was in his early 20s. He's from New Jersey originally, ended up going, he was here. He was very uncomfortable with slavery, and the Civil War started while he was in Wilmington, and he left to go back north. But I want you to look at this photo, this image. And if you take the columns off, you have a very clear Italianate house, which was the popular style in the North. This is an up-to-date, Dr. Bellamy is building a very up-to-date house, but his niece down in Columbia, South Carolina wanted columns. So you get a house that's a little peculiar, that has look at the multiple colors that are showing in this photograph. He had he's doing the big house. He's looking forward. He's not looking backwards with this house. Now, the paint job that was done in 1860 might have been the only paint job until the 1970s. This is what it looked like in 1951. And if it looked bad then, just wait till somebody does this to it. Some folks volunteered to paint the house, and they got a start on it, and they realized how much work and paint was going to be required to do this house. So it sat like this literally for about 15 years, referred to as the walrus, because those center columns being painted. Back of the house looked terrible. And this was a situation where it was a real estate decision from Preservation North Carolina what to do with this house. And we were asked to come into the picture to work with a nonprofit group that had owned the house for they had owned the house for about 20 years and really were having trouble getting it off the dime. They'd gotten a paint job done on the outside, but the interior was still in great need. Again, look at this and you'll see an Italianate house surrounded by a big Greek Revival porch. The columns, they came from New York. Right there, 1860, and he's buying his columns from New York. He's not buying these columns. They're not being done locally or from the South. It saved him money. to buy them from the north. And that's where it came from. But the house, this is a 1992 photograph. This is the point where Preservation North Carolina is accepting the property. The house had been firebombed. And the house had not been used since the late 40s, early 50s. And it was used then as it was the home of a single older woman, one of the daughters of John Bellamy. So it had not gotten any maintenance for years, and then had been firebombed. And sat there that way. The firebombing was 1972, and here's a 1992 photograph. But this is a house that made sense to be a museum. Um, and with my work with Preservation North Carolina, I was kind of the anti-museum guy. And when I say that, no harm intended with the North Carolina Museum of History. This is not that kind of conversation. But I used to go out, and every property owner of a poor, pitiful, great house out there, and there were lots of them, said it needs to be a museum. Every little town had to have a museum. And those museums were the way to save the house. But now, in some cases, they need to be undone. And we've worked with a number of museum houses to turn a great house back into a private residence. But the Bellamy Mansion was right there, in a highly trafficked street in a tourist community. And so it made sense for it to be a museum. And we had a weird little advantage. This is an aside. To the left is what happens to a slate mantle when you have a major fire. It just disintegrates. We had to get the mantle on the right from Louisville, Kentucky. Very similar. You can see very, very similar mantle. But that mantle was just destroyed by the fire. And here you get a couple more images of how smoked up and damaged with fire damage. So we're accepting that house and working on it. We acquired the house, and we had the advantage. I'm going to say this. We had the advantage of not having the furniture. The furniture had been taken out of the house and stored in another house, which also burned. So the Bellamy Mansion furniture that we have was the furniture that got, a table got given to this daughter, a table got given to this cousin, these chairs, were given to another family member. Those pieces migrated their way back to the Bellamy Mansion. But what do I say is an advantage? We didn't have to wrap our interpretation around the furniture and place. We could have exhibits in the building. We could have activities in the building that kept people coming to the building. Our goal with the study that we did was to have 10,000 visitors, and now we have about 30,000 visitors. So it's done very, very well from that standpoint. The plaster, we had to have extensive work done on. We did paint research on the interior. The paint research on the interior, after looking at 4 floors, it was white, 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 with the rugs providing the color. We found samples of the rugs and reproduced them around the house, which provided the color for a very white house. Now, whether they would have done that, you bear in mind, they're finishing the house in 1861, and the Civil War is beginning in 1861. So they're finishing after the firing of on Fort Sumter in Charleston. So they might have done something very different if they had the years to finish out that Italianate house that they had. Of extreme importance is the slave quarters at the Bellamy Mansion, because they're very rare. These are urban slave quarters. This is where the women and children who were domestic slaves lived. When I say domestic slaves, Dr. Bellamy is not making his money in Wilmington. Dr. Bellamy is making his money down between Wilmington and the Atlantic Ocean, mainly doing turpentine, doing naval stores, turpentine, etc. That's where he's making the money. This is where he's spending the money. And the enslaved folks here would have been women taking care of the house and the household. To the bottom right, you see two privies, two doors. Let's see if you can see them better here. This is a 1980s photograph of it. It's been, at least been stabilized at this point. The pile of bricks out there is from the adjacent building that got torn down in the 1940s, which was the carriage house. And the male slaves, male domestic slaves, lived upstairs. That would have been the butler, the people taking care of the horses, carriages, taking care of the family's needs, would have lived in the adjacent building, which was kind of a mirror image of this building. But if you look down to the right, those two doors down in the bottom right are two privies. Now let me tell you, there were privies with they're four-seaters, you might say. The white folks aren't using those privies on a daily basis. The white folks are using chamber pots in the house, and the enslaved folks are bringing those chamber pots down and throwing the waste into the privy. We did our paint research on the house, had a wonderful opening for the house with descendants of various enslaved folks whose families had lived there. And there it is completed. People say, isn't that a fancy place for enslaved folks? Well, this is the view out the back of the house. They wanted a nice view out the back of the house. And there are no windows on the back side of this building or on there's some on the side, but on the back, no windows which was a control issue, fire issue perhaps as well. There's a control issue of the property was such that if enslaved folks were coming and going out of this structure, they're doing it from the front, and there's no way to do it from the back. This has been in the middle of all sorts of things, including right in the middle of the election 1898, where John D. Bellamy was elected to Congress. That's the election that took place the day before the Wilmington massacre, and where the elected officials of the city of Wilmington were removed by force. It's a part of the story that people need to know in North Carolina history is we actually had a coup d'etat right here, Wilmington, North Carolina, 1898, and John Bellamy was elected to that process. And much of what happened on that day would have been visible from the porch of the Bellamy Mansion. So we've been talking about 1898 since the mid 90s. A lot of folks say, I never heard of it. Well, it's time to hear. Important part of our history. So one of the things that was unusual about the Bellamy Mansion and really inspired us to want to take this on was that the young Yankee architect kept a diary, a daily diary of what work was being done, who was doing the work, how much they were paid, whether they were free black, white, enslaved. He was not comfortable on the slavery issue, as I mentioned before, but it's in his diary how this house got built. So we know a lot about who was building this house. One of them, for example, was William Bellamy Gould. Look down to I don't know if my cursor, if y'all can see my cursor, is these two pieces of plaster have WBG in them. There's the young plasterer, enslaved plasterer, William Gould, who escaped to the north through the port at Wilmington. Interesting little irony is we would never have seen these initials in this plaster if we hadn't had the fire. That's really ironic. These are pieces of plaster that fell off the ceiling onto the floor, and there are the initials. So I guess weirdly, it's, in a weird little way, it's a blessing that we had the fire. Not really, but and here's the family in front of the new marker out front of the house, and you have uh, a in New Hampshire you have uh, uh, a a Gould that's been done in memory of William Gould, who left Wilmington and went north, and had quite a good career. Uh, Here's another family that's associated with the enslaved people at the Bellamy Mansion. The Taylor family, they had a family reunion at the Bellamy Mansion, which we were delighted about. This was in 2016. And Robert Taylor, let's see, Henry Taylor was one of the craftsmen who helped build the Bellamy Mansion. Robert Taylor is his son, born just right after the Civil War. And his great great granddaughter was Valerie Jarrett, who was President Obama's uh, highest domestic advisor. She had an office in the Oval Office, or in the White House, adjacent to the Oval Office, and was um, from Chicago, and remarkable lady. And she can trace her heritage directly back to the Taylors who were enslaved in Wilmington. So fascinating combination. Stacy, anything I need to answer right now? I'm going to go do a quick Oberlin thing.
Nope, go ahead, and
Okay,
it's at the end.
I'll keep going. Uh, Here in Raleigh, Oberlin Village, important freedmen's village. This is where freed slaves created their own community after the Civil War. It got to be nearly 2,000 African Americans living there. They created their own churches, created cemetery, etc. And a couple of houses were in trouble. So here we are with the analogy of the animal shelter. These are two dogs that are really on their last few months. And look at this, and it's got aluminum siding, but you can kind of say there's a cool house hiding under all that aluminum. So we start doing our research on it, and the National Register nomination said that built by Willis Graves and Eleanor, his wife. Willis Graves from Mississippi, Eleanor Graves is down from 3 blocks down the street. And the National Register nomination says that the sons went north as brick masons and plasterers like their father. No. Lemuel Graves went north as to Cornell, where he has got a degree, did graduate work at Columbia, taught at several HBCUs, and returned to Raleigh. But his claim to fame of sorts is he was the first student to be inducted into Alpha Phi Alpha, which is a very large, very prestigious African American fraternity. So when I'm talking to a Black audience and I say something about here's Willis Graves or Lemuel Graves, the first Alpha, there's this immediate moment of recognition. White audiences, not so much. And why was he the first is because there was an alphabetical order, and he happened to be the first. But we'll claim it, right? Here's Lemuel Graves, in Who's Who in Colored America, and you see all of his accomplishments there. Quite a remarkable man. Here's his brother, Willis Graves Jr., known as Bill. He becomes a lawyer, works in Detroit, and he was involved with Thurgood Marshall, worked with Thurgood Marshall on the Supreme Court case that ended up ruling against racially restrictive covenants. And kind of funny, here's the Pittsburgh Courier, Black Papers, 1948 article about that case. And if you look really closely, you'll see that the author of that is Lem Graves Jr., who went on to become a very prominent uh, journalist. We'll come back to this. So Bill Graves is also right there in Who's Who of Colored America. And again, according to the National Register nomination, he's gone north as a plasterer. I don't think so. We didn't. And why is it that way? Because the person writing the National Register nomination is the only information they can find is in the city directory. And Daddy Willis had put them in the city directory as plasterers and masons when they were 18 years old. In case this education thing doesn't work, they got something to fall back on. So then you have Lem Jr., who became a very prominent journalist. Here's a picture of him with Harry Truman. He was one of the first three African American journalists to travel with a president. Quite a remarkable guy. He worked for a number of years in Paris for the U.S. Department of State. They are going to Paris. They are in Paris, and there's their home in Paris. Quite remarkable family, and there he is in Who's Who in Colored America. Again, Raleigh knew nothing about it. So people say, why did they leave? They left Raleigh in the 1930s, and I say to them, okay, imagine going to Cornell, going to Columbia, teaching at colleges. Imagine working on a major Supreme Court case and having to sit in the back of the bus. I'd leave too. So we had to move both of the houses, renovated the smaller house, which is important for other reasons, and took all the aluminum off, restored the Graves house, and there they are together. And if you know anything about these two houses, it's actually one house. We had to create this fantasy that they are one house in order to put the two houses on the same lot. They're connected underground, so it's one utility system, one water bill, one electric bill, and this is one house, one address. But you do what you got to do, right? One of the fascinating things about the house is the interior woodwork's very fine and very fancy, but we think most of it was brought from job sites where Willis Graves was a brick mason. The family that's associated with Willis and Eleanor Graves are absolutely remarkable. There got to be, from the photographs you see here, there got to be at least 10 graduate degrees among these various people. Very well educated, very smart. And in these photographs, we have people from Florida to Seattle. Remarkable family. They left Raleigh. And here's civil rights marker that just got put up in the honor of Willis Graves and his work. Just put up this last year. And to end things, here's our little puppy. This guy, 12 feet tall, was going to get destroyed. We were working with a house that was associated with the houses being moved down the street in front of George. But we find out that George is actually named Snoopy. So he's really Snoopy now. And he's our logo, or our mascot. And to put this in context, if I stand in front of Snoopy, I can stand right under his chin. That's how big Snoopy is. And he gets photographed almost every day by kids. So that's my story. I'm sticking to it. And I'm going to in screen share. And Stacy's going to tell me
Absolutely. Thank you
what
so much.
questions I've got.
Oh yeah, we've got a few. So let me toggle back to the top. Sasha says, this is not necessarily a question, but I was born and raised in Danville, Virginia, and had no idea about the Thomas Day property in Milton. That's very interesting and really neat that the property was able to be reclaimed and is now preserved as a historic site. Big kudos to Reservation North Carolina for their work preserving historic properties.
I must say two things there. Thank you for those comments. But part of it is we don't know who built these houses. And we are working on, we've done an exhibit about Black builders in North Carolina, working on a book with UNC Press about Black builders, and working with a TV show with PBS North Carolina about Black builders and architects in North Carolina, because that connection gets lost. And it's fascinating to hear someone from Danville that doesn't know about this. And I mean, there are people down the street who don't know. And that was certainly the case with the Graves house as well. None of us knew. None of us knew. And because the building got saved, we learned so much more. So with that, back to you.
So another question, when Preservation North Carolina purchases a property, do they try to find a buyer for the property who will then take on the work of the restoration, or do they conduct the restoration before and try to find a buyer, or is it a combination?
Well, 9/10, if not 19/20 of the work we do is to sell the properties to people who will do the renovation, or to get covenants or easements on the property if it's in good shape and the owners want to make sure they get preserved. We rarely do the work ourselves unless there's a patch on the roof that's needed, or stabilization of a front porch so we can get people into the house or out. Our hope is that again, that analogy of the animal shelter really works. We don't want to keep the property. We want to put it into somebody else's hands, so I'll take care of it.
Absolutely. Mary asked, do you know if there are any other local Black men or women featured in the Who's Who in Colored America book that you shared?
Oh, there are a bunch of North Carolinians in there. They're mainly, by and large, they are associated with colleges or universities, um, or ministers of larger churches. But it's fascinating. You can go online, and I mean, it's really not hard to find. Go look up Who's Who in I think it's Colored America, I believe was the name, is the name of it. And it was done for about 15, 20 years. You can find it and just search for North Carolina. And it's really interesting to see who's in there. But there are people I don't know. And I dare say most whites would not recognize the names of the people who are in there as who's who, which is why we need to do this crazy work.
Absolutely. So I dropped the link to We Built This educational program, exhibit, film, and book into the chat. So if you guys want to check that out, please go into the chat. The link is right there for the website. Last question, and I know this might be a hard one and kind of a cliche, but I just have to know, after this incredibly long and wonderful career of yours, do you have a favorite historical property that you helped rescue during your time with Preservation NC?
Oh Lord. Yes and no. It would depend on what day you ask me, in a sense, because you know, actually I showed you three that are just humdingers. I mean, which one of those three would you pick? Union Tavern, the Gray's house here in Raleigh, or the Bellamy Mansion? Just those three right there. Any one of those three would make me really proud. We worked with some really important properties, but it wasn't that we took them to the finish line. We got them to the starting line, you know? And now the Bellamy Mansion, we've taken to the finish line, so to speak, in a sense, in the two houses on Overland. But most of what we did was get them into someone else's hands, and they took care of them. And I've said through the years, I'm stylistically agnostic. I love mid-century modern. I love the fanciest Victorian. I love the most stately federal style house. But what I'm really starting to love is the connections that we're also making with the builders
Mhm.
and understanding a little bit more about, you know, that vision of the owners had to be executed by somebody. And in North Carolina, uh, pretty much anything of any size that was built before the mid 20th century was built by black hands. Even, I mean, one of the things that we're working on this TV show, one segment's about Biltmore, and there were actually more black hands on Biltmore, the construction of Biltmore, than there were white hands. Now they were doing different kinds of work. And it's been very exciting to start kind of digging some of this stuff up because they're very interesting stories.
Thank you so
So I
much.
cheated. I didn't answer your question, right?
No, that's you kind of did though. It's impossible to pick one. It's kind of like picking your favorite child.
That's right. That's right.
Thank you so much, Myrick, for sharing all of your incredible work with us, and just the important work that you and Preservation NC have done and continue to do. We really appreciate you.
Well, thank you so much and appreciate the good work that North Carolina Museum of History has been doing all these years. And thank you for asking me to do this. I really feel honored.
Our pleasure. Um, Thank you guys for watching today. We hope that you enjoyed it, and we hope to see you at our next History at High Noon. Go Go Godfather Chuck Brown. That's happening at noon on June 11th over Zoom. In the meantime, we hope that all of you have a wonderful rest of your day and your week. We'll see you soon. Thanks, guys.